And the first of those discoveries is that the universe had a beginning. And we had a couple of wonderful episodes on your program discussing the story of how this was discovered.
Right.
But basically there were two lines of evidence, or two main developments in science. One was the evidence from observational astronomy that came from Edwin Hubble, who discovered that the universe was expanding outward in a roughly spherically symmetric way like a balloon, implying that as you go back in time, you would eventually get to a beginning of that expansion, marking the beginning of the universe.
Yeah. How many galaxies do you think are out there? You gave us me a number
I gave a
before.
conservative estimate in my book of 200 billion. I've since been told by astronomers that the more current estimate may actually be 2 trillion, which is another 10 times
I want to
that
start
many.
with that because think of 2 trillion, ours is one galaxy, but think of 2 trillion more making up what is called the universe.
The visible universe.
And this fellow
right.
here, through his 100-inch telescope, he discovered that it was kind of round in shape, and there's reasons for that, but the fact is, think of all of those in one big round.
Just an expanding outward, that space is expanding in the forward direction of time, outward from a beginning point.
That's right.
And that perspective was confirmed by developments in theoretical physics with the great Princeton German Jewish professor Albert Einstein, the guy with the famous bad hair who was such a genius. And Einstein had a theory of gravity that implied that massive bodies are bending space, or what he called space-time, the interconnection of space and time. And as you go forward in the outward direction, space is expanding, but in the reverse direction, at any progressive point in the past, the spatial volume of the universe would have been smaller and smaller and smaller, and that means the matter of the universe would have been more densely compacted, which would mean that the space would also be more tightly curved, and eventually you'd get back to a beginning point where space was so tightly curved that it corresponded to zero spatial volume. The great Cambridge physicist, Stephen Hawking, first proved that there was what he called a singularity at the beginning of the universe when he solved Einstein's equations for gravity called his field equations.
And he was sitting in the Isaac Newton chair at Cambridge when you were a student there, right?
I was fortunate enough to attend one lecture series he did on a little book that he later published called The Brief History of Time.
And what did he figure out?
He was able to solve Einstein's famous equations,
Right.
and in so doing established that yes indeed, this intuitive idea that as you go back in time the universe would be smaller and smaller, but the space would be more tightly curved. And the implication of his work was that the universe at some finite time in the past would reach a limiting case where matter became so densely concentrated and space so tightly curved that it would go to an infinite curvature corresponding to zero spatial volume.
We talked about how big the universe was, how many galaxies are out there. All right, think of that being compacted, and these fellows came down to the view of a singularity. How big was the singularity?
Yeah, if you go to zero spatial volume, there's no place to put any matter.
What does that mean? It means
there's nothing. It means no space.
There's this little space, and there's nothing
No, it's not
there.
a little space. The implication of the singularity theory is that there's no space.
That's right.